So let me know who you think is doing the worst fake French accent and who you think is doing the best fake French accent this week in Barkskins. I don't dare to say who I think is doing the best and worst fake French accents because I've forgotten what a good French accent sounds like at this point. So I was surprised to see that Barkskins had 2 new episodes out tonight and not just one as most shows do. I kind of like it. I feel like it gives you a little bit more of a opportunity just to see the plot develop on a weekly basis, especially in the middle of seasons when episodes tend to slow down quite a bit. But it does make it a little bit harder to review. So if I skip some important stuff, just bear with me. It's hard to fit it all in. I'm just going to try to hit the key stuff that stood out to me with spoilers, so you've been warned on that point. But before I get into that, if you're new to the channel and if you want to see my new reviews of Barkskins and other shows and movies and books as I release them, please consider subscribing so you don't miss a thing. So getting into this week's episodes of Barkskins, which are called The Sugared Plum and The Law of Two. I'm feeling slightly less invested in this show this week than I was last week. I tend to think I would give it a B for these 2 episodes. And it's primarily because I think that the atmosphere remains very, very strong. And I think that the historical aspects are very good as well. And I think it's a very interesting and unexplored period of history, a very savage period of history. But I feel like there just wasn't enough happening in these 2 episodes. I feel like there's a lot of scenes, and you would think that this was because this was based on a book, but this actually is one of those adaptations in name only series. Now that I've read the majority of the parts of the book that are being adapted here, I can say that there's very little from the book in this series, and the majority of the characters aren't even in the book, or at least not in substantial roles. So they're just having these conversations to establish information, and oftentimes information that we already know. And to me, I think there just has to be more action taking place because action develops character. And I think it's just not very cinematic to have all these scenes of people talking in rooms and delivering expositionary dialogue. For instance, I felt like the scene with Hamish Gomes, played by Aneurin Barnard, and Elisha Cooke, played by Thomas Wright, where they were talking, about the fact they revealed a number of things, but most of them the audience kind of already knew. Like, we kind of already knew that Cooke had been responsible for the massacre of the French settlers by the Iroquois. And we kind of already knew some of the other things that Cooke revealed during that conversation. The only real new revelation was why Gomes was involved. And we discovered, obviously, that his brother-in-law was the one who had come here and had incited all this. So that was, a conversation that didn't need to go on as long as it did. But then, and this is just an example I'm giving, there were other conversations that were problematic in this way. But then they had another conversation with Gomes and the person in charge of the British Trading Company in Quebec, where again, they basically just rehashed this conversation and didn't really add a whole lot new that we needed to know. So they're wasting a lot of time here, in my opinion, and a lot of this could have just been set up at the outset. It didn't need to be established later. So this could have all been set up. But there were a lot of good things this episode, in these 2 episodes. I really appreciate the cinematography. Again, I think that the strongest character in this series so far. I think there's a lot of intriguing characters, but the most interesting character from my perspective is the woods and the atmosphere that the series has created for them. And the cinematography goes a long way towards doing this. I think that there were a couple shots that stood out to me. One was the scene where the Iroquois were coming in as a raiding party, and you saw the moonlight just glimmering on the waters of the lake as they rippled, and I thought that was just gorgeously shot. And I also really appreciated a lot of the scenes in the woods with René Saul's character, played by Christian Cooke. And I don't think he's a particularly interesting character, but I think he is kind of representative of the simple frontier spirit. He's just the one character I think that really appreciates the land, and we see his developing relationship with Marie, that he is the one who perhaps is growing closer to the land than any of the other characters. And I appreciated the way that the sun, you could just see the shimmering beams of sunlight coming through the trees, and it's really quite majestic. This is a dark series, but it does have a lot of beautiful imagery that I think goes a long way to softening the gritty and violent plot aspects. Monsieur Trepagne continues to be a delight, and David Thewlis is playing him in just such a tragically ludicrous fashion that you can't help but pay attention to every word, every line delivery that he does. He dominates every scene that he's in. And in these 2 episodes, he goes and pursues a wife, and he eventually aligns himself and marries Melisande, played by Tallulah Haddon, who is a very mercenary character and probably the wife that Monsieur Trepagne needs, even if not the wife that he thinks he deserves. And it's interesting to see him trying to put on these airs and having this mansion in the woods and kind of setting himself up as a land baron in this new land, and not really seeming to grasp that this land has no place for aristocracy the way that the old world, the way that Europe does. And I think that the first character to really grasp this seems to be Charles Duquet, played by James Bloor, and I think that he made the greatest strides, the most progress in these 2 episodes, in terms of going from being this indentured servant to someone who's on the run, to being captured by Indians, to finally being in good with Elisha Cooke. And obviously he's very Machiavellian. He obviously has read, well, he couldn't have read because it hadn't been written yet, but he understands the principles of how to win friends and influence people, because he's always helping people to get what they want so that they can help him get ahead. And I think that I don't really like this character. He's very rodent-like and just kind of not very likable, but I do think that his plot is more interesting than a lot of the other characters, because we see him moving up in the power rankings of this world. And I do think that it's interesting that even he has lines that he won't cross, because obviously Elisha Cooke wanted him to kill Gus Lafarge, played by Matthew Lillard, may he rest in peace, that he wanted him to kill his son. And while initially they ended the first episode that they aired last night with a cliffhanger, making you suspect that he might have done it, he actually didn't follow through with it. And so apparently he has lines that even he won't cross, despite his Machiavellian efforts to reach the top. We got to see a little bit more of Madame Matilda Giffard, and I am fascinated by this character, mainly because of the way that Marcia Gay Harden is playing her. But quite honestly, we haven't gotten to really see her do anything yet. Now, there's a lot of shades of Deadwood here, and I've seen other reviewers point this out, in that you have this mute girl who survived the Iroquois massacre, and she holds the secret to it all, and you kind of suspect that that's going to come into play in later episodes. But we don't see a lot of development of that in these 2 episodes. And I think that, you know, one of the things, as I said, that really stood out to me in these 2 episodes was just how women are struggling in this world to have power. And obviously you've got Madame Mathilde, who's more trying to get by on her own merits now that she's widowed, now that she's a widow. And we get to see her trying to survive in a man's world and play kind of at the same level as a man, but we see a lot of other female characters in this world. We see this with Marie, we see this with Delphine, we see this with Melisande, who are just forced to kind of rely on men to, you know, have any kind of power or influence. And it's going to be interesting to see how all of these 3 women's plot lines, well, I guess 4 women's plot lines, play out. And to me, the most interesting of them, as I said, is Madame Matilde. But I'm also very interested in Melisande, even though I don't think she's a very likable character, I do think that she got in some very good dialogue, and she's kind of in the same way that I think that Charles Duquet is kind of the secondary, which kind of fits with the theme of the Law of Two. He's kind of the corollary to Renee Selle. She's kind of the corollary to Delphine, and it's interesting to see how the Law of the Two played out in this second episode that was released last night. So overall, I really did enjoy these 2 episodes. I'm still engaged with the series. I think there's going to be some pretty thrilling and exciting things in episodes to come. I think that the world continues to have a lot of tension and brutality, but I just want to see a little bit more forward momentum to the plot, and I would like them to find ways besides just having characters talking in rooms to explain what's going on and to develop the story in a more cinematic fashion. In some ways, this is one of the most cinematic shows on television right now, and I think that, you know, it's very enjoyable in terms of the visual style and the way that it's portraying this savage land, but I think that it could do better. So as I said, I would give these 2 episodes a B, but I look forward to better things in the episode to come, and I just assume that these episodes are necessary building blocks to better episodes in the latter half of the season. So those are my thoughts, but let me know what you thought in the comment section. And if you're interested in seeing more content, please consider subscribing to the channel. And as always, you can watch more videos right now.